Welcome back to another Reddit readings video. If you enjoy these stories, don't be scared to leave a like. Now, do be scared. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Followed on the sketchy side of town. I've been on this sub for a couple years now, had my own couple let's not meet moments, but for some reason tonight I just needed to share what happened. For context, I'm still in school and work for my family member on certain weekends at a local college selling concessions at the stadium. It's about twice a month and the stadium is off towards the edge of town. It's Friday night. I had just gotten out of school and I had to go straight to work. I get to work for 4 hours, half shift tonight, and my boss tells me we need more spoons for tomorrow's event. We sell ice cream, and these events have like 5,000 plus people at them. I say okay, I'll go grab them on my way home. The only store open with heavy-duty spoons is all the way on the other side of town, and I still wanted to go meet up with some of my friends and mess around. I decided to take the faster, but more sketchy way around the outskirts of town. I live in a weather bipolar state. It snowed last night, but I figured the roads would be fine enough even if they weren't plowed. I take off to the store and the first 5 minutes go by and nothing is wrong. I haven't seen a single car or any buildings the entire time. But keep in mind it's approaching 9 p.m. and I'm on the outskirts of town. And no one really takes this way in case they really have to. All of a sudden I see something in the corner of my eye, and it looks like a man, roughly 58 I'd say, wearing shorts, t-shirt, and a backwards hat. He's in the ditch, walking in snow when it's 10 degrees out. My first thought is to pull over, but I'm on the phone with my mom at the time and she warns me not to as some things have happened before in this town. Example, a couple years ago a college girl was kidnapped and found dead rolled up in a rug in 2014. I considered stopping, but for some reason I told myself not to. I wasn't really worried about anything. I'm a young dude driving a big pickup truck. Last type of person anyone would want to harm, right? I passed the man, going about 40 miles per hour. Like I said, roads aren't the best. I drive not even 500 feet past him, and immediately, a car that I did not see at all before turns on and pulls out of a field entrance off the road and starts to follow me. At first I thought I was just focused on the man in the ditch and didn't see a road, and that's where they come from. But I later found out there was not a road there. Now, again, I'm not super worried. I've watched my fair share of crime movies and read plenty of stories on this sub, and I didn't feel it was a threat yet. I start to approach the town again and have to take some turns to get where I'm going. I turn left, the car turns left. I turn right, and the car turns right. I go around a roundabout and skip my turn and go twice as no one else was there, and the car follows. At this point I start to worry a little, but maybe they just need to go to the store also. I then pull up to a stop sign. I wasn't on the best side of town either, may I add, and I turn without my turn signal. The car follows. Now, at this point I should have gone straight to the police station, but I still didn't think much of it. I'm 2 miles from the store, where plenty of people will be. I take a few more turns and the car continues to follow me. I completely blew a stop sign at a non-busy intersection and the car does a quick stop and go and catches up. At this point, I'm 2 turns till the store, so I'm still not worried. I turn into the store, and the car turns also. The store also has a gas station, so I pull there first to act like I was getting gas. The car sits off to the side of the road, in between gas station and store, and just sits there. I wait about 10 minutes and the car doesn't move. At this point, I start to get worried. I'm a young kid alone at night near the bad side of town. I call my friends I'm supposed to meet up with later on and give them the license plate for the worst case scenario, then take off to the store. I cross the street and the car comes straight behind me. I'm freaking out the phone, not knowing if I should call the cops or not. I go and park as close as possible to the store, and the car parks 3 rows behind me and a couple down. It's getting late at this point and the stores are closing soon. There's only a couple others in the lot. I turn my truck back on and go park on the complete opposite side of the lot. Get out and I completely bolt inside of the store. I'm not super overweight, but I'm not skinny either. I'm about 61 and 200. Who would want anything to do with me? I get spoons, take my time in the store. I go to call my friends to walk back outside, and my phone is dead. I look out the sliding doors and suddenly there's a white van next to my driver's side. Looks like no one's in it, but the back windows are covered and it's running. Big red flag. I run to customer service and explain everything, but they think I'm some young kid messing around. At the time I didn't see the original car, but no way in hell I'm going outside with that van next to my truck. After waiting what seemed like hours, 30 minutes, the van pulls forward and the original car appears from the side of the building. You can see from the in-store Starbucks window they talked, and both drove off. I wait another 10 minutes and dash outside. I speed to my friend's house, and when I get there I park in his garage. My one buddy asked why there's a big orange mark on my tire, and my heart sank. When I was inside, the following car must have marked my tire. After inspecting the rest of the truck, we found a small pipe dropped in the bed of my truck surrounded by snow. It was about 2 inches wide and I'd say about 18 inches long, wrapped in duct tape. It was not mine. I was alone, no phone, scared, in a part of town I'm not familiar with. I try to laugh it off, but now that everyone's asleep I can't help but think what would have happened if I walked outside. I've always been sort of ego boosted on the fact I'm a chubby fat dude that no one would want to mess with. But after tonight I realize anyone can be targeted. So, creepy men who followed me all night and waited by my truck, let's not meet. I have a few other let's not meet stories. If you'd like me to post them, let me know. Update: police came and took the pipe today, as multiple of you said, and I knew already they can't really do anything about it as nothing really happened. They said that they'll look into the license plate, but other than that nothing much can happen, as no crimes were committed. I'm a nurse for the elderly. One of the patients made a terrifying confession. Despite what some might tell you, it's not actually so bad to work in this field. Sure, some of the elderly can be difficult at times, and like any other job, this one has its stomach-churning moments. But most of them are sweethearts. All it takes is some compassion and patience to break through to them. So yeah, I mostly love this job. I wouldn't give it up if I could help it. The only part I don't like are the occasional confessions from some of the patients. They say that people can feel their ends are nearing, and after a few years working this job, I've come to believe that. Some of them have no one else, no family or friends left, so they air their dirty laundry, so to say, in front of us nurses. Most of the time, it's pretty mild stuff. Old Gregory cheated on his wife in their 30s. Larry used to be into hardcore BDSM. Lisa stole from her company for a while. Stuff you don't necessarily expect, but that doesn't surprise you in hindsight. Other times, it borders on disturbing. Jenkins had a bar fight and ran away, and to this day he's not sure if the other guy survived. Sasha had an abortion on her own, without telling her boyfriend at the time that she was even pregnant. Kira abandoned her family, running away in the night to start a new life, and seeing the missing person posters ate her up inside. That's the kind of stuff that gets under my skin. But I can at least understand where they're coming from. I can sympathize, even if I don't condone their actions. But then there are the monsters, the ones that have committed truly atrocious deeds, and their confessions keep me up at night. Julia, the sweetest old lady you'd ever meet, gaslit her husband into suicide to cash out his life insurance. Freddie helped burn an entire village back in the Vietnam War, basking in the flames and the screams of the dying. Sally abused her child growing up, to the point it caused a myriad of developmental problems. Mind you, I haven't been there myself for all of those confessions. Us nurses tend to share, morbid as it might sound. Go ahead and judge if you want, but we didn't ask for those burdens to be placed on our shoulders, and we'll seek relief wherever we can find it. Most of the time it's just innocent gossip, so you won't believe what Gus used to do when he was young. Other times there are tears and silent cries in the break room, stone-cold expressions and a pressing atmosphere, not a hint of levity to go around. But such is life in this field. Most of us have learned to live with it, and those who couldn't have walked away. I myself am in the first camp, and I don't think last night will change my mind. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. You need some context in order to make heads or tails of this. It all started with Parker, so I should too. He's a bitter old man, no way to sugarcoat it. A tough nut to crack, rage and hatred for everyone and everything simmering under the surface at all times. He's the type of person that won't be satisfied until your parade is soaked to the bone in rain. He's been here since before I was hired, so the other nurses warned me about him from day one. God help you if you have to interact with him. He can ruin your entire week just by opening his mouth. They told me. I didn't take them seriously, thinking he couldn't be that bad. Spoiler alert, he was, but not in the ways you'd expect. He didn't get physically violent like some of the other elderly. He didn't fling shit and piss-soaked diapers at us. He flung words, but he knew how to make them cut, and cut deep. Our first interaction happened when I had to check up on him and make sure he took his medicine. It was a nice evening, and I found old man Parker in his room, lounging in his recliner. He faced towards the windows, back to the door, and he didn't bother to turn around and look at me when I entered. "Good evening, Mr. Parker," I greeted. "Hey, fresh meat," he spat, a response laced with spite. I gritted my teeth and tried to sound polite when I answered. "My name is Jessica, but fresh meat," he interrupted me. "You won't last a month, so I won't bother learning your name. Now why are you here, fresh meat?" I told him why, and he pointed at the empty pill bottle on the nightstand next to him. Then he returned to staring out the window at the sunset without another word, so I took my leave. That was how the first 3 weeks went by. I went over to his room for this or that. He made some snide remarks to insult me, and I held my tongue. It was clear he didn't want anyone around, especially me, but I was never a quitter, and I wasn't about to bend the knee to some old fart with a vendetta against happiness itself. "Are you still here?" he asked on the 4th week when I passed by his room to change his bedding. "My God, woman, you're about as smart as you're pretty." He was in his recliner again. Most of his evenings and nights were spent there. By day he'd be outside or in the common area, terrorizing everyone he happened upon. But as soon as dusk approached, he'd retreat to his room and peer out the window until he fell asleep in the recliner. I ignored his remark, approaching the bed with a fresh set of sheets and pillowcases. "What? Did you swallow your tongue? Forget how words work." He kept pestering me. I took off the old sheet and discarded it on the floor. Even though it wasn't all that dirty, that wouldn't be a big surprise. Honestly, the only thing surprising me is that you learned to speak in the first place. Now, I don't recommend doing what I did, reacting like I had. At that point, I should have thrown in the towel and walked away, but I didn't. After 2 weeks of abuse like that on the daily, I snapped. I threw the fresh sheets haphazardly on the bed and stomped over to his recliner. "Listen here, you shriveled up balls," I went off on him. "I don't know what your problem is, but I don't need this kind of treatment in my life. I'm not surprised that your family left you. With an attitude like that, I'd have dropped you at a care home first chance I got as well." I hurled insult after insult at him, digging deep to dredge out the nastiest side of me, fully expecting Parker to go off on me in return. But instead he stood there and took it all. With each colorful word leaving my mouth, the corners of his lips pulled a little further up, into a satisfied grin. I only stopped when I ran out of breath, and he waited a moment to make sure I was done. "What did you say your name was again?" he asked. "Jessica, Jessica," he repeated, letting each letter roll off his tongue. "Tell you what, I like you." He returned to staring out the window, and I was able to carry out my work in peace. I regretted the outburst for a while, feared that it would somehow come back to bite me in the ass and get me fired. But Parker didn't tell anyone. It was our little secret. Every day after that, he'd grin when he saw me. He still gave me lip, but it was different, more jovial, not trying to insult me and drive me away, just to tease me. But I could work with him without breaking down into tears afterwards. So I took my win. After a while, I started teasing him back. He'd call me his insult of the day. I called him mine. We'd laugh it off and move on. What I'm trying to say is that we developed this weird bond, and I actually started having fun. I started looking forward to it. We didn't talk about anything else. I didn't know the first thing about him, and he didn't know the first thing about me. But in my eyes, that only added to the charm. Life moved on, and before I noticed, I'd been working there for years. Rumors about Parker abounded. Everyone had their theories and beliefs, but I couldn't confirm or deny any of them. The man was still as much of a mystery to me as he'd been on the first day. Then one day about a month ago, things started to change. He'd make less comments. He spent more and more time in his room, isolating from everyone. Parker had always been very self-sufficient for someone his age, but he started needing help with things, and I could see it killed him on the inside. I didn't mind. That was what I was getting paid for. But the man had his pride. He refused to be seen by a medic and get treatment, so we all expected him to kick the bucket soon. A prospect that made most everyone in that care home happy, but I for one dreaded it. Even so, I knew better than to try and talk to him about it. One evening, before I went home, I checked on him. Parker was in his usual spot in the recliner, drapes drawn aside and window wide open. The sun was already gone, sunken below the horizon, painting it red as night creeped in. He didn't acknowledge my presence, not until I stopped next to him. "Hey, Jessica," he greeted, his voice a low rumble. I nearly went for a hey, fart bone, but the sound of my name and the way that he said it gave me pause. For the first time in the many years I'd known him, he sounded serious for once. A pit of dread formed in my stomach. "Everything all right, Mr. Parker?" His lips curled at the corners, pulling his gaunt face into a smile. A dry, raspy chuckle left his throat, but he let my question linger in the air for a long moment. "Going home for the night?" he asked. Yes, could you stay just for a little while longer? Of course, I knew what this meant. Parker felt his time was coming, and he wanted someone next to him. I leaned in to take his hand into mine, but a bastard will be a bastard to the very end. He slapped my hand away, so we stood there in awkward silence, watching the night settle outside. You're the closest thing I have to a friend, Jessica, he said out of the blue. The closest thing I have to a family. He let out another chuckle, but it sounded sad. God, I'm so pathetic. I put a hand on his shoulder, and this time he didn't slap it away. I had no idea what exactly to say. Parker wasn't one for sappy speeches, so in the end, I went with the truth. Blunt as it was, I figured he'd appreciate my honest opinion. It's your fault for being a grumpy old fart. You could have had many friends here, so why? Do you have any plans tonight? He asked, and I nodded a no. Then, can I answer your question with a story? Sure. He shifted in the recliner, biding his time as he searched for the right words. I'd seen it all before in others. They think themselves ready to open up until the time comes to actually do it. With a sigh, he resigned himself to the situation and started speaking. Parker was born in a small town in the 1940s, right off the back of the Second World War. He had an older brother and a father, neither of which he remembers. The first died of some disease as a child, and the second got drafted and died overseas while Parker was still a baby. That left his mother alone to raise him, but they weren't the only ones struggling to make ends meet in that town. Most everyone else did too. Life back then was harsh, especially for isolated communities like theirs. But I had a decent enough childhood, Parker assured me. My mother did her best, working herself to the bone and going hungry most nights to make sure I wouldn't. He took a short pause, prying his gaze away from the window to make eye contact with me. I could tell he was uncomfortable. Dwelling on the past brought him a great deal of anguish, but he looked away from me after a long moment, back at the dark world outside, and continued speaking. Despite his mother's best efforts, his childhood was short-lived. Parker had to grow up fast, to become dependable, to help around the house and find work. It wasn't that uncommon back then. Kids as young as 8 or 9 working shoulder to shoulder with the adults. We didn't have much of a choice. Things such as getting an education or waiting until they were adults. Those were little more than pipe dreams. But luckily, Parker was big for someone his age. At only 10, he was taller and stronger than his 15-year-old friends. He could handle his manual labor, and having an extra set of hands to go around, a second breadwinner, did wonders for their household. I still remember getting my first ever pay, he said with a sad smile. A small sum, but I was proud. Mother wanted me to spend it on myself, to get something nice. But I didn't. I bought a sack of flour for her to make bread out of, and I used the fabric to make myself a new pair of shorts. I'm so sorry, I stuttered. Yeah, me too. But time went on. Parker kept working throughout the years, living life one day at a time. Trouble was never far off, but he faced it head on. The adults always tried to shortchange him for his work, and other kids tried to bully him out of his meager earnings regularly. The first time that happened, I came home empty-handed with a broken nose and a busted lip, he said bitterly. 5 of them ganged up on me. It was a dog-eat-dog world back then. When he was about 13, and his mother brought home a new man, Parker hoped for a change, a chance for him to have a father, a role model, someone to teach him how to be a man himself. He thought life would get easier. How wrong I was, he said. That man was an alcoholic abuser. Parker and his mother found out as much soon enough, her sooner than him, but he saw the signs. Even though he still worked and brought his earnings home, food was suddenly in short supply. His mother always had bruises she tried to hide, and his stepfather was always drunk. When I returned home beaten up again by the older kids, I was hopeful for once. I thought he'd go out there and do something about it. And he didn't. I asked with hesitation. Parker huffed. He beat me up as well for being a sissy, in his own words. It better not happen again, you hear me? He said that the next time I come home empty-handed, he'd show me real hell. Why didn't you run away, or get the authorities involved? Run away? Where to? Parker answered, and the authorities didn't give a shit. He kept enduring the abuse for the sake of his mother, couldn't leave her all alone with his stepfather. But it escalated gradually. Soon enough, his stepfather would take Parker's money outright. Then he'd beat his mother out in the open. It wasn't long until he raised his hand at me on the regular, Parker said. But it kept my mother safe, so I endured it. On the nights I'd get beaten up, she was safe. And those nights only got more common as time went on. At first, Parker would get beaten up for stepping in, taking the place of his mother. Then he'd get beaten up for not bringing enough money home. Then for no reason at all, at some point, I couldn't take it anymore. I snapped, Parker admitted. The other kids stole my money again, and I was afraid to go home that night, afraid of what he'd do to me. So I ran off into the woods, looking for a place to sleep. And instead, I found this old well. Old well? I asked, not sure what it had to do with anything up to that point. Old well, Parker confirmed. You know, a hole in the ground for people to get drinking water. I know what a well is. At any rate, he found this old well, a dilapidated thing, long out of use and in serious disrepair. Parker nearly fell down into it when he leaned over the edge to peer down. He threw a pebble into it, but it never landed. Then he tried spitting into it and yelling down into the shaft. It echoed for a long time, much longer than it should have. Parker listened in awe as his own voice reverberated from the well for minutes on end, not getting any fainter. But awe aside, it gave him an idea. I didn't like the sound of that. I did end up returning home that night, Parker said. Found him beating up my mother since I wasn't there, and he chased me when he saw me. Parker led his stepfather out of the town and into the woods, farther away from civilization, deeper and deeper between trees, until he heard the faint echo of the well still calling out. I hid nearby and kept quiet, he said. Waited for him to find the well, and he did. He heard the echoes of my scream and thought I fell down into the damn thing trying to hide. The asshole laughed about it. His stepfather approached the well and leaned over the edge, still laughing. Did you learn your lesson yet, you damn bastard? Parker imitated him. Little did he know that I did. It just wasn't the lesson he wanted me to learn. Parker burst out from his hiding place while his stepfather was distracted and ran up at him. All it took was a single push, he said grimly. A single push, and he tumbled over the edge, fell into that abyss head first, screaming all the way to the bottom. From that day onward, the echo of his voice joined mine in the well. The authorities pretended to search for him for a few days, but no one truly gave a shit. He was just an alcoholic bastard, so everyone thought he'd gotten his comeuppance, that he died in a ditch somewhere, or he ran away in search of greener pastures and other people to terrorize. No one suspected us, Parker said. Not my mother, who was too weak to fight back, and they considered me just a kid. No way in their eyes for either one of us to kill an adult man. With him out of the picture though, Parker's life improved somewhat. He still earned a pittance, and the other kids still bullied him, but at least he could rest easy in his own home. I went to that well every day at first, then every other day, then once a week at most. But the screams never stopped, day and night. They got fainter, barely a whisper in the wind, but I could still hear them. Didn't it scare you? It terrified me, Parker admitted, but I also saw the possibilities. That answer terrified me. I contemplated for a moment to call it a night, to put an end to Parker's confession and leave. But I was also curious, for better or worse. Next up were the kids that bullied me, Parker continued. It took me a long time to build up the courage to even consider it. But enough abuse will push reasonable men to unreasonable actions. The gang was 5 members strong, their leader 19 years old and the youngest about Parker's age. The rest were all in between, starving street urchins, Parker called them, either orphans or with home lives similar to his own that pushed them to run away and brave the world. Except they were lazy, Parker said. They took the easy way out, stealing, conning, bullying other kids, like they did to me. The community wasn't happy with them, but they never targeted adults, so they were tolerated. Until they beat up Parker for the 100th time and he decided he'd had enough. I only wanted to get rid of their leader, he said. Thought their little clique would break apart without him, but I couldn't separate them. Parker tried to challenge him to a one-on-one fight outside of town, but he came with the rest of his gang and he was pissed. You could see the bloodlust in his eyes from a mile away. I knew they'd give me hell like never before, so I had no choice. All 5 of them had to go. Parker ran away, and just like his stepfather, they chased him into the woods. He hid near the well again, and when they got closer to inspect the echoing voices, Parker repeated his earlier stunt. I pushed the oldest boy first, he said in a stone-cold voice. Then, before the others had a chance to wise up, I pushed the second oldest as well. The others were smaller. I could take them. They tried to run away, to escape with their lives, but I couldn't let them. Parker chased them down, and he caught up to the youngest first. He tripped the boy from behind and stomped on his knee to break it, then kept going. The second one he grabbed by the shoulders and swung into a tree head first, breaking his neck. I tackled the last one and got him into a chokehold. He kicked his legs, clawed at my arm, and tried to bite me a few times. When he realized he couldn't break free, he started pleading, begging for his life. Told me he wouldn't speak a single word about what happened there. He begged like that all the way to the well, until his legs were over the edge. The boy with the broken neck followed, and the one with the broken leg dragged himself quite the distance by the time Parker got to him. But he went through with it, and that night the well gained 5 more voices. Parker stopped his retelling for a moment and stared off into the distance. At first I thought he was either giving me a breather, a bit of time to process what I heard, or that he was searching for words. I looked outside as well, and the silhouette of a tree against the starry night sky shook in the distance. A reverberating scream followed. "We don't have much time left. I have to hurry up," Parker whispered. I was frozen by his side as he picked the story back up. In shock, in fear, not knowing what was about to go down or what I should do. I'd witnessed a few confessions by that point, but none came even close to Parker's. He confessed to 6 murders in just as many minutes, and I was sure there'd be a few more by the time he'd be done with me. The guilt ate me up inside, he confessed. I went by the well every single day, fighting back the urge to jump into it myself. No one missed those kids, and no one in the community blamed Parker. He wasn't the only one getting bullied by them, and on some level everyone was glad they were gone. One less problem in their lives, so they were happy to pretend the 5 ran off somewhere to carry out bigger heists. I was depressed for years because of it, but I kept telling myself that I had to do it, that my life was better now. Lies I only half believed, but they got me out of bed in the morning. Another tree shook outside, closer to us, but there wasn't a scream this time. Parker flinched visibly. Anyway, the years flew by. People kept leaving the small town, flocking to big cities in search of work. I was one of them. I found this wonderful girl and I left with her. They took Parker's mother as well, and the 3 of them found work at some factory or another. And for a few years, he thought he'd left the small town and his horrible deeds behind, until I started hearing screams in the night, voices I recognized. I thought I was imagining it at first. I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than me just going insane with guilt. Another tree shook outside, followed by a howl. And let me guess, it was all too real. Parker nodded his head. My mother went missing one evening, and we never found her. The big city police took it a bit more seriously, but they couldn't dig up a single lead. No witnesses, no suspects, nothing. But Parker knew exactly where to find her, or what was left of her. After a long trip back to his hometown and a trek through the woods, his worst fears were confirmed. His mother's voice joined the tortured chorus in the well. I broke down right then and there, cried in that forest by myself all night long. It was supposed to be me, not her. He returned home though, if only for the sake of his girlfriend and soon-to-be wife. She was pregnant. They'd soon have their first child. And Parker wanted a better life for them than he did growing up. He'd be there for his kids, there for his wife, there to make sure they'd be all right. They got married with little fanfare, few friends and even fewer family members for a proper wedding. And their child was born a couple of months later, the most beautiful baby girl in the world. Parker explained with a glint in his eyes. Holding her, hearing her crying, it was all I ever wanted. Enough to justify everything I'd done and been through in a heartbeat. Another tree shook outside, and something took contour in the underbrush at the edge of the property. I let out a yelp, and Parker reached for me. He grabbed my forearm and held me steady as I tried to back away. "We still have a few minutes," he said calmly, "and don't worry, it's not here for you. You're safe." He proceeded with the rest of his story, and I had to try my damned hardest to divide my attention between him and whatever was out there. I treasured every moment with my wife and daughter, but you know how these things go. She grew up in a heartbeat. Before I realized it, she spoke her first words, took her first steps, moments I couldn't be prouder of as a father. The thing bellowed, a guttural sound that rattled my bones. Dying animal was my first thought, a coyote getting murdered or a fox going into heat. It took a step forward, into the faint circle of light surrounding the care home, and I saw a human face, then another one, and another one, contorted in agony, and held together to form a gigantic head. Then that thing returned once more, Parker said, raising a hand to point at the advancing beast. More cries in the night, more screams and howls. I knew what it wanted, but I couldn't let it have me or my family. Another step brought its neck and torso into view. Pulsing muscles crisscross each other at random, skin stretched until it pulled taut. Dozens of human arms jutting out of it in random places. Its myriad of eyes moved every which way, scanning, searching. I knew I had to do something before it was too late, to either get rid of it or appease it, and I knew what it wanted. "What?" I asked, stuttering and shaking with fear. "People, bodies, victims," Parker answered. "More of them." I opened up its appetite and now it was hungry. If I didn't give it what it wanted, it would get it itself. Take my world from me. I didn't want to do it. I tried to talk myself out of it up until the very last moment. but I was pressed for time and worried sick for my family, so I went back to the town. For a moment, I wished my eyes could do the same thing the creatures did. I wanted to turn and look at Parker to see his face, but I didn't dare take my eyes off of it. Every last muscle in my body was clenched, holding me in place. I was barely able to breathe. It took another step forward, and all of those dead, beady eyes focused. Every last one of them pinned on the window, on the room, on me and Parker. I kidnapped someone, Parker said, his voice fraying into a cry at the edges. An older man living all by himself. I knew him, knew he'd been a widower for decades. And he knew me. He barely fought back as I tied and gagged him. I expected him to plead as well, like the kids had. I expected him to fight me, but the silence, it was worse somehow. Did he know about that thing? I managed to push out a question. What? No, of course not, Parker answered. He was just old and frail, and he knew he couldn't do anything to stop me. Maybe he'd given up on life long ago, like I ended up doing. I don't know. The rest of the monster came into view as it advanced towards the open window. And there was so much more to it than I expected. So many legs moving haphazardly, slapping the lawn at awkward angles to pull the body along. It felt surreal, like that window was a screen and I was merely watching some cheap horror movie with even cheaper special effects. At night, I dragged the old man out of town and through the woods. I got him to the well, said a short prayer for his soul, and tipped him over the edge. He went down without a sound. The monster stopped a few feet away from the window and craned its head forward. By that point, I was pretty much useless, more of an ornament than an active participant. Parker let go of me and moved to get up, failing twice. His old bones were all out of strength, but he still had his determination. The third attempt saw him to his feet, even if a bit wobbly. I returned to my wife and daughter after that, he said, taking a step towards the window, and all was fine for a while. Seeing her smile growing up, having her by my side, it kept the guilt at bay. She was my world, and I was ready to do anything to keep my world from crumbling. The monster cooed. One of its many faces moved across its skin, pushing against the rest, until it got to the forefront. A wide smile took over its lips, replacing the agonized expression. The next time the screams returned, I knew what I had to do, knew what the rest of my life would be like, what sins I had to commit. Every few years, I'd return to that cursed town, kidnap someone in the dead of night, and throw them into the well. The smile on the face at the forefront only grew wider, but the rest didn't match. They started whispering aggressively, their voices merging as they got louder. I kept at it until my daughter grew up, until she found a boy she wanted to marry and moved out, until everyone left that town behind to be an empty shell for the forest to retake. And I called it a job well done. I thought my daughter was safe and I could finally let the monster take me, that I'd finally atone for all of my sins. Parker closed the gap to the window, and so did the monster. It pushed its many arms into the room, hands both big and small grasping at the air as they tried to reach him. And what happened to her? I asked. The question felt strange coming up my throat and leaving my mouth, like it was uttered by someone a million miles away, completely detached from the situation. Parker extended one of his arms, but paused and turned to face me. What do you think happened, Jessica? He asked in a somber voice. What do you think pushed me on the run for the rest of my life? Made me grow weary of approaching people and making friends? I held back the answer, if only because I had one more question. Why tell me all of this? Parker smirked. The same mischievous, shit-eating grin I'd gotten used to from him. Calls I'm a selfish old bastard, he said matter-of-factly. I wanted at least one person to know and maybe miss me, and now you do. He took the final step that brought him within the monster's reach, and it got a hold of his arm with 100 fingers. The many eyes looked past Parker directly at me. Thank you, Jessica, Parker said, his back to me. You can leave now, that would be best. I didn't argue with him on that. I slowly walked backwards towards the door. My head was heavy, mind spinning, and my legs felt like unsteady stilts 100 feet long. But I did it. I reached the door, backed out into the corridor, and closed it gently. Parker watched me the whole time, a peaceful smile on his lips until the latch clicked. The rest of the night was a blur. I wandered to the break room with tears streaming down my face, but I didn't even realize I was crying until I tried to light a cigarette, and a tear fell on it. My hands shook like an earthquake, as did the rest of me. I smoked about half the pack, waiting and praying for that thing to leave so I could too. A couple of hours later, I finally built up the courage to bolt it out of the care home into my car. I drove home in a haze, eyes darting at every little movement, and I didn't manage to sleep a wink until the break of dawn. But I returned to the care home for my next shift, looking like a ghost. Police were there, interrogating everyone about Parker's disappearance, and I lied to them. Couldn't possibly tell them the truth, not when I don't even know where that damned well is. So yeah, I lied until they left me alone. I lied until they packed in their car and drove off. Everyone else is awfully happy that Parker is finally gone, and I stand out among them like a sore thumb. Sitting in his recliner, writing this as sunset approaches, I realized he was right on both accounts. He was a selfish old bastard, and he left behind someone who misses him. I tipped wrong on Uber Eats. Can someone help me fix this? I found a new restaurant on Uber Eats and caved when the app gave me a coupon code. I ordered from it and fat-fingered the tip law. The delivery person is thinking they'll get $100, but I can't afford this law. Does anyone have any idea how to fix this? They'll be here in 15 minutes. Edit. So I looked up the restaurant to call them and it turns out I can't find it. It's probably a ghost kitchen, as one of you pointed out, that doesn't have any physical stores. I'm just going to cancel the order. Everything pizza sounds tasty, but not a tenth of the paycheck is tasty. Sorry. Edit. Well, I just had an experience. Delivery person still came. I turned the lights out and pretended I wasn't there, but he just kept ringing the bell. And the dog started barking, so I finally opened the door. He was kind of scruffy, but I can't judge because I know food delivery is tough. I told him I canceled the order and he can eat my dinner for all I care, but he didn't even shake his head. He just kept saying everything will be okay until I took the box from his hands. I felt kind of bad, so I tried to give him a $10 bill, but he didn't even move. I just took the box and closed the door, and he's still out there. LMAOO. Edit. Delivery person finally left. Sorry to worry some of you guys. I don't need to call the cops though, just cause someone so damn weird. Don't know how he delivers meals on time though, cause he's so slow. Hygiene kind of bad too. I looked at the ring, and when he was walking away I saw some wax come out his ear. So gross, but I've seen worse in college, so I'll live. I'm more pissed that there's a half-eaten slice in my pizza. Free is free, but come on. At least eat the whole slice if you're gonna eat something. That's even more gross. Edit. No, I'm not going to post a picture of this pizza. I'm hungry and I just want to eat. Edit. There's weird shit on this pizza. Are anchovies supposed to move? Ate a couple slices, but not eating those fish. They're definitely raw and look slimier than usual. Gonna go to sleep now. Pizza is a 3/10, but it's free, so we take these. This is the final update. Edit. Just woke up. My stomach feels fine, but my ear feels weird. Maybe make it a 2/10. Sorry, I said it was the final update, but I thought I'd be asleep and not up at 3 a.m. Was hungry again. Yes, I know. I'm a big eater and opened up the pizza box, but it looks like some of the toppings are gone. And the anchovies are on the floor. I looked around and some are even in my bedroom. Wonder if my dog got to it. If he can open and close pizza boxes, I got to post that to Reddit. Edit. My ear still feels kind of weird, kind of buzzy. My stomach hurts too, but maybe from stress. A commenter mentioned that sometimes ears get clogged from wax, but I kind of feel a weird wet sensation in there. I'll check it out later. Sorry for treating this like a personal blog. ITT. Free pizza and Opus complains about their health anxiety. Mods remove this if this time. Edit. Ear still feels weird. Like really weird. My dog started barking at me too. I can't sleep. I read my 16-year-old daughter's diary. I read my daughter's diary and I regret it. My daughter started school a month ago and she's been very busy with classes and clubs. So busy that her room has become chaotic. I decided to deep clean her room as a reward for her being so passionate about school. She also has a cat, and I know the room in that state is absolutely horrible for any pet's health and comfort. So I started with the floor first. I wasn't even able to step into one place without stepping on garbage or clothes. I brought a laundry bag and a garbage bag. Eventually, I went back into the kitchen and grabbed a recycling bag as there were so many Monster Energy drink cans. I've never even seen one of these in the fridge. Anyways, 2 hours later I finished the floor and felt proud of myself, as even though I'm an adult I've never cleaned one room for this long without bailing. I placed the laundry into the washer and went to do the closet. It wasn't as bad, so I finished a lot quicker and switched the laundry into the dryer. That's when I remembered I never did underneath her bed, so I took the broom and pushed everything onto the open floor. And there were so many more Monster cans. I began to think about how bad this could be for her health when I spotted 3 books. 2 of them looked like stereotypical diary books, so I dusted them and placed them on her messy nightstand. And the 3rd book was a spiral notebook and said science, so I assumed it was school notebook and placed it on the nightstand. as well. I completely finished the room, including mopping and changing the cat litter that was way overdue to be done. As I was leaving, I spotted the science notebook that was now on her desk. I picked it up and decided to read it to see which science she was learning, as in earth science, forensics, etc. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of Mountain Dew, then sat on the couch and cut on the TV. Fox News was playing, and that when I opened the notebook, I killed her, right at the top in big letters. I nearly choked. I began to panic, but then remembered she had a journalism class, so I thought it was just a short story she made. Then I rethought about the science on the front cover. Then again, I had a second thought that maybe she was going to use this as a science notebook, but then switched it and didn't change the cover. I used to do that all the time in college, but it definitely made things confusing for me. I calmed all my thoughts and went on reading it. It was disturbing, but I can't place images here, but I'll write out everything that I can below. Page 1. I killed her. I, Sarah Bett, killed Haley Fountain and don't regret it. I loved it. She was my BSF, but seeing her big blue eyes lose life was such a great feeling. It was Tuesday during classes when Vance came up to me and asked if the both of us can go to the mall after school. That's when I had the thought, I should let this be her final memory. It was such a great thought. Vance has gone through so much and she should be free. I told her that we should definitely go. She was so happy, and soon she'll be grateful to me. After classes, I skipped my club. Me and Vance went to the mall. I spent every penny on her. I wanted this to be the best day of her life. And it worked. She was so happy. Her eyes so full of life. Her green eyes are so beautiful. Page 2. Unreadable. Page 3. I convinced her to come to my grandmother's house and told her it is near the forest. She followed me. We were in the forest. I walked behind her as she looked at a precious pretty tree. I cut that bitch's throat. I banged her head on that pretty tree over and over. Her brain fell out. I turned her around and cut out. Page 4. Those fucking eyes. Those pretty eyes. They're scribbling on this page. Page 5. Oh, I love. And the rest is unreadable. Page 6. Unreadable. Page 7. I buried her in the Olympic forest, and I buried everything that are happy she's free and I have her eyes. Those fucking eyes. Page 8. My mother cares. Ever since Vance has gone missing, people have been searching for her. Even my mother and I have searched for her in the Rainier Forest. I didn't even kill her in that forest. Why are they so stupid? My mother has been comforting me because Vance is my best friend. Well, my mother is a great person, and she has pretty brown eyes. Pretty eyes. If you want to see the photos, I can try to find a way to share them. I'm terrified. Please help me. This is so much more than a journalism story. We did search for her BSF. We did go to that forest. Does that mean she actually killed her? I don't know what to do. I'm a retired major crimes detective, and I've seen true evil 3 times in my career. All 3 were in the last decade of my career. I spent 12 years walking the beat before I had the opportunity to step in and assist a detective and a CSI on a double homicide. Through my numerous connections from years on the streets, we managed to get several leads that led to the arrests of the guilty. I moved out of patrol and spent a decade investigating sex crimes, arsons, and armed robberies. I took advanced training seminars and workshops, studying past cases and offender modalities. I worked with the drug squads on serious assaults and the occasional murder before finding myself stepping in for a retiring detective. I was familiar with his partner, Connolly, and we became a good team. I bring this all up to emphasize that I've seen horrific shit in my 33 years on the force. Images I'll never shake. People who still haunt my dreams. I can honestly say that most of the criminals I've put away haven't been evil. They've all been motivated by something, however benign, to commit their acts. Then there are some that are on the fence, the ones that take violent crimes further than would typically be the case. And then there are those that dream up horrific atrocities to be inflicted on the world around them. Because why not? Patty Wilson fell somewhere beyond the shades of your typical serial killer. She was the first person I encountered on the job who I could reliably say had true evil in her. Patty was an RN that had moved into an OBGYN and birthing clinic in one of the city's lower-class neighborhoods. This particular clinic had a terrible miscarriage and stillbirth rate, but the numbers were fudged and kept hidden. Eventually, people in the neighborhood started talking and word got out of how many deaths there were. Our station was contacted, and normally that type of thing would land on another desk. But we were short-staffed, so Connolly and I were brought in. Our investigation led us to Patty, and we found that in her 23 years at the clinic, there had been over 2,000 miscarriages. She'd been giving a chemical cocktail to the expectant mothers, claiming it would help with sleep. Instead, it gradually killed the fetus as it grew. We also discovered that after several dozen healthy births, Patty would take the baby away to be cleaned up but would return with the horrible news that the baby had died shortly after being delivered. Our investigations into that didn't lead anywhere concrete, but one of the threads we were pulling on led us to believe Patty had been lying to the mothers, telling them their baby had died, when in fact the baby was healthy but was shipped off to the highest bidder. A live baby on the black market could fetch a tidy sum, whether for organ harvesting, stem cells, or something more deviant and horrific. We believed it was racially motivated, as almost all the miscarriages and stillbirths occurred exclusively with black parents. But Patty denied it all. I remember watching Patty in our first interview with her. Her face was normal and moved expressively as she spoke and answered our questions. But her eyes didn't. They were empty, black holes, and the longer you stared into them, the more uncomfortable you became. Even after the trial, which had her served with multiple life sentences, Patty denied any wrongdoing. The next case where I witnessed true evil, it fractured into an investigation involving multiple events. Connolly and I were called in to investigate an attack on a beach volleyball tournament. On the city's largest beach, there was a national tournament with over 300 teams playing on 50 courts over the course of the weekend. The ages were from 12 to 65 and were both men and women. During morning warm-ups before the first game on the first day, one scream turned into 2 screams turned into 100 screams. Over 1/3 of the players needed immediate medical attention. Their feet, ankles, knees, thighs, hips, stomachs, and in some cases up to their shoulders and face, were covered in deep, gushing cuts. Someone had gone to the beach the night before the tournament and brought hundreds of small, flat pieces of wood with razor blades sticking up from the centers in an upside-down capital T shape. The wood was dug into the sand, with the blades sharp and pointed upward, and hidden just under the surface so no one could see them. It must have taken hours to set up. There were no deaths, but the damage that was caused resulted in hundreds of injuries and several dozen athletic, young adults with sliced Achilles tendons and a dwindling future in sports. As with every investigation, we started off at the crime scene and worked our way outwards in tight, concentric circles. While the CSIs were combing the beach, Connolly and I were interviewing the people who ran the tournament, looking for any enemies or people who might want to target them in this tournament in particular. But those led nowhere. Sadly, the CSIs fared no better. The entire crime scene was awash. There were so many footprints and shoe and sandal prints in the sand it was impossible to search for tracks, and the actual razor blades and pieces of wood had been doused in bleach before being placed in their small dugouts. There were no security cameras on the beach, and the lone one that was in the parking lot didn't capture any cars between the hours of midnight and 7 a.m. Our phones were ringing off the hook with tips, but there were no real leads. After a month, we were nowhere in the investigation. Then a new investigation came in and our hamstrung department got even tighter. Connolly and I took it on as well. At a senior's home along the city's waterfront, a fire had started in the basement. Because of the accelerants used, it quickly overtook the first 2 floors. From there, the rest of the 8-story building went up. 22 residents and 9 staff died in the fire, all from smoke inhalation. We scoured the undamaged security footage, but again found no suspects around the parking lots or front entrances. The footage from the rear of the building was destroyed, so we couldn't check it. Then a third investigation dropped onto our desks. This time, there was a mass poisoning in a junior high school cafeteria. There were 23 deaths, 15 of which were students, and over 100 severe injuries. Our investigation showed that someone had stealthily broken into the school overnight and poisoned every piece of food in the cafeteria stockroom, fridge, and freezer with arsenic. It was a miracle more people didn't die. All the school's exterior cameras were working, and after scouring them for clues, we finally found one at the back doors. The footage captured someone dressed in all black, with a hood and ski mask over his face. He'd used a small set of lock-picking tools to enter the back door which led to the kitchen. He used the same door to exit and ran off across the soccer field towards the water, and everything made sense. The beach volleyball courts, the seniors' home, and now this junior high. They all backed out onto the water. The school itself had taken advantage of that fact by introducing students to rowing, kayaking, sailing, swimming, and other sports and activities on the open sea, and the seniors' home was partially marketed based on its incredible view of the water. We hypothesized that 3 mass crimes were committed by the same individual. We marked all 3 locations on a map and scanned down the coast for all the marinas and harbors. Then we went back through all the routes and picked out various waterfront hotspots we knew would have footage of their exteriors. Using the dates of the 3 incidents, we cross-checked the footage to try to find any repeat boats on the nights in question. We watched a lot of footage. There was only one boat that stood out, a large, older black speedboat being driven by a lone individual. We couldn't make out details. A red light glowed from inside the cabin. Connolly and I got pictures of the boat printed and went back to check the marinas and harbors. None of the docks we went to had seen the particular boat or had records of it, which made us think it was docking at a private residence. I spoke to one of my friends in narcotics named Waco, and he brought up the drug boats that had been populating the cove near the last dock we visited. It turned out that the many drug users in our city had been moving away from alleyways and SROs and onto small dinghies and drug boats, turning them into floating pill houses. The boats were harder for cops to break up or investigate, and you could float in the cove or out in the nearby channel for up to 6 months before having to vacate. Of course, the 6-month rule was never enforced, so the cove kept getting busier with more and more drug boats. Waco offered to help. He went in one night and made his way around the 30 or so boats, which were loosely tied together. Waco found our black boat. He learned the owner was a guy people called Red. He was a dealer and let people use and pass out on board his boat afterwards. The next night, Waco went back, and we followed from a distance with the Coast Guard. We had Waco wired so we could hear everything on board. His plan was to get on with a few others to buy and use some heroin, then pass out. He would fake the shooting up part and pretend to fall asleep. Connolly and I listened in, hearing the details of the casual conversations going on from the other users as they bought and started prep. Soon enough, all the voices went quiet, including Waco's. A rough, agitated voice called out, asking if anyone was awake. There was no response. The voice, belonging to Red, laughed and said good. We heard some shuffling, then the engine on the boat rev into gear. The boat peeled out, leaving the cove behind. Waco had a GPS tracker in his shoe, so Connolly and I watched the boat on a monitor as it headed out to sea. We followed from a distance. The Coast Guard's lights all turned off and went completely stealth. Connolly and I continued listening in. After several minutes, the engine died down. There were sounds of chains rustling, then clanking together. Waco's voice came over the mic in a hushed and frantic whisper. He's chaining us together. There's an anvil on one end. Our captain flipped the lights and sirens on and the boat gunned it towards the blip on our radar. Over the mic, we heard Red notice the sirens. He started to panic and, from what Waco told us, was about to toss the anvil over the side. But Waco was up and ready to fight. He surprised Red from behind and got him in a chokehold. When we arrived, Red was unconscious on the floor of the boat and Waco was sitting on his back. There were 5 users laying on the floor. They were all dead. Red had given them all spiked batches and they died minutes before. When we got back to land, interrogating Red was useless and terrifying. Useless because he said nothing, and terrifying because of how he said nothing. He'd bitten off his tongue moments before we got him in the room. He was in a hospital for the next day and a half before we sat him down with a pencil and paper. We didn't really need Red to talk though. There was more than enough evidence to put him away for the deaths of the 5 users on the boat, and then divers found more bodies along the same stretch Red boated on. Altogether, it appeared Red was responsible for the deaths of over 50 people, and that didn't include the beach volleyball tournament, the seniors' home, or the junior high school. The thing I remembered most about my brief time sitting across from Red during the interviews were his eyes. Just like Patty, I watched his face move and twitch and wrinkle, but his eyes were always the same empty black, holding my gaze. We never got a reason or motive for any of it. We found out he'd been in and out of foster homes up until his 16th birthday. Coincidentally enough, there was a house fire which killed both his foster parents and 2 other kids living there. After that, Red disappeared for a few years, then got nabbed for an assault in a movie theater and spent his 20 seconds in and out of prison. Who knew how much destruction Red had caused over the course of his life? My 3rd experience with True Evil was just as Connolly was nearing his retirement. Poetically enough, it was our last case together. We'd been investigating the individual abductions of 6 Caucasian women between 18 and 22. It was a little old for grooming gangs, and we ruled out human trafficking. We'd done a ton of legwork and repeat interviews with friends and family. No one went back on previous statements. Everyone was solid. We didn't have a single person of interest. We did have one connection between the girls. They all traveled in similar underground heavy metal and punk rock circles. They also appeared to have a similar fascination with Satanism. Connolly and I went back over the details of each disappearance and found they all coincided with a certain opening band that occasionally played at a weekly death metal show. They were called Helvete and were a Norwegian black metal band. They were known for covering themselves in what looked like blood and performing in masks. Each mask was different, but followed the typical design of a face with eyes, nose, and mouth. But the texture looked like dried skin. Dark, wicker twigs stuck out at the back of the head, resembling a porcupine. The more we read of them, the more they became our suspects. Connolly and I got an address and decided to go introduce ourselves. The place was on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a large plot of land and forest. We parked up the driveway and I'll admit, the walk up to the house, I was feeling nervous. It was dusk and the sky was a darkening gradient of orange to dark blue. The residence itself was a large, old farmhouse. Death metal blared from somewhere inside, thudding out through the shuttered windows. There was a large, black van parked out back and 2 sedans in the front. A scream erupted from the house, louder than the death metal rock. I pulled my 9mm and Connolly pulled his .38. We called for backup and went in through the front door, which was unlocked. The interior had a staircase to the right that led upstairs and a hallway to the left that led to a living room, dining room, and kitchen. More screams erupted along with the pounding music. We could tell the screams were coming from below us and found a door leading to a staircase to the basement. The screams and music got louder and were joined by chanting. Connolly led, trigger-fingered, creeping his way down the stairs. As he got to the bottom, Connolly swung out to clear the room. But someone was there. A tall mountain of a man in a dark mechanic suit, wearing one of the group's eerie masks, swung down at Connolly. Connolly saw it coming, firing his .38 into the guy. My right ear blew out and my left was filled with ringing, chanting, and screaming. As I got my head back on, I saw that the man had swung down at Connolly with a hatchet, and it lodged in Connolly's neck. He fell back, but continued firing into the far end of the basement. I let my 9mm lead me around the corner. There were old bed sheets hanging from the ceiling, obscuring my vision of the basement. The heavy metal kept pumping and the chanting grew, but the screaming had stopped. I wanted to check Connolly, but I needed to clear the room. I stepped over the body Connolly had shot and followed the chanting. It led me through the sheets and into a large opening. Dozens of red candles were lit. There was a circle drawn on the floor, and inside it was an inverted pentagram painted in what looked like blood. In the far corner, the ground was dirt, and I could see several graves protruding from the earth. At the center of the pentagram, a young woman wearing barely rags was chained to pegs in the ground and had just given birth. On each point of the pentagram around her were what appeared to be the remains of 5 recently delivered and now dead babies. Kneeling in front of the exhausted and crying woman was another band member, dressed similar to the previous Hulk, but smaller and with a slightly different mask. He held the newest, just delivered baby in his hands as it cried. There were 2 other figures in the room, one over each of the kneeling guy's shoulders. The one to the right was holding a large, traditional 2-handed sledgehammer. The handle was thick wood and the mallet was solid iron, lined with carvings and covered in blood and innards. The guy on the left was holding an open book and had been guiding the others in the chanting. We all stared at each other in some strange, horrific standoff. The guy with the sledgehammer pulled first, lifting it to swing at me. I leveled up on him and walked 2 rounds into his chest before turning to the other 2. The guy with the book threw it at me and lunged. I managed to get 2 more rounds off into him, but his momentum carried him through me and we hit the floor heavily. My head cracked the ground hard and I saw the familiar stars rushing the edges of my vision. Everything sounded like it was underwater but was moving really fast. I managed to turn my head and saw the one remaining band member, the one holding the baby. He placed it on the ground at the center of the pentagram. He grabbed the sledgehammer from his dead friend and lifted it to slam down on the remaining baby. I didn't even realize it, but I still had my 9mm in my hand. Reflexively, I pulled the trigger repeatedly until it clicked empty. The final shot connected with the guy's head as he was about to swing down. He toppled back and the sledgehammer fell safely to the side. I don't remember much else after that. I woke up in the hospital and was informed Connolly had died, as had all the band members. The baby and the young woman had survived, though, so there was that. The investigation was taken over by 2 other detectives and revealed that the band had been taking women from shows, bringing them back to the farmhouse, and trying to impregnate them. Once they had gotten 6 pregnant, They planned a mass ritual sacrifice to be conducted after the final birth as an offering to the devil in some Faustian bargain. The other women had been killed after their deliveries and were buried in the far end of the basement. I never saw any of the band members' eyes when they were alive because of the masks, though I'm sure if I did, they'd carry the same darkness as Patty's and Red's. I said I'd seen true evil 3 times in my career, and that's true, but that last time, there was more to what happened than what I put in my reports. It's the reason I retired immediately after the case. It's the thing that made me realize there was an evil I couldn't even begin to comprehend. I'd seen it right when I got into the basement and leveled off my 9mm at the 3 men. There was something else down there with us. It was floating in the middle of the circle, kind of like black smoke, but it stayed in place, wafting together before separating and reconnecting. Bolts of red electricity shot through it. The smoke got larger as the chanting grew. It pulsed and expanded and reached out, forming into the shape of a body. What gives me nightmares now is thinking about if that last baby had been killed and the smoke finished solidifying. I'm terrified that whatever it would have manifested into would have shown me another realm of evil. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, then hit the like. See you guys next time.